Storks. Welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Let me crank down the tune a little bit. Well, now it got all soft again, so you might not be able to hear much of it in the background, but if I keep it too loud, you'll hear too much of it in the background. Well, so welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Today we're going to keep on going in the same vein as we've been. I think it's a nice riff for the holidays. I'm going to call this one A Star Atop the Christmas Tree, an all-father-side chat about the stellar storks and the grim sweepers. Okay, so where am I going with that? Well, yesterday we talked in a lot more detail about how the periodic table got started, the early elements, and I told you some interesting stories about the first element, hydrogen, also known as proton, and the first 12 apostles, the next elements that were created after that. After God gave an example of how to make an element, the family went wild, and soon there were many elements. That game started getting kind of old, as I said. But what was the game all about, and how did those elements get created? Anybody that knows how creation works knows that, well, if I have one hydrogen atom, I can't do much with it. It takes many hydrogen atoms to build a star. Compressed hydrogen atoms that are compressed tightly enough to create the pressure that generates the temperature to heat up a star and cause that hydrogen to fuse into helium. Okay, and this is the basic of stellar dynamics. This is how stars form. Now, you ask, well, if God was the first hydrogen, where'd all the rest of it come from? And this is another part of the story of creation. Okay, it is possible and highly likely that gods will create clones. They can do that. The clones that they create are not completely like the original. Just like the clone of a human being would not be completely like the original because it doesn't have the same soul as the original. Okay, so once you got one hydrogen, which is God, and you want to make a whole bunch of it, well, you go into the replicating business. And you create a bunch of clones, virtual souls, that have no consciousness. They're programmed to act like the original. This is how gods get things done. They don't do everything themselves. They don't have all power. They don't have the time or the bandwidth to do everything, unlike you've been told in Sunday school. They're just a soul like any other soul with a limited ability to perceive and to act upon what's around them. How do they act on a bigger scale? They create clones, just like we are sort of doing with our artificial intelligences right now. And, people are trying to clone parts of their knowledge, their expertise, their understanding of programming, and let it go off on its own to do something that's very programmatic, but maybe has an independence of thought. And this is exactly what God and the old souls from the first heaven did in this phase of the multiverse. So once hydrogen was invented, then the next thing to show the children was how to use it. And that required creating a cloud of hydrogen that could be condensed by, well, we didn't have gravity then. What we had was spiritual energy. Spiritual energy can absolutely attract and repel things. As you probably know, if you've ever been attracted or repulsed by another person for reasons unknown to you. They struck me wrong. Or, oh, well, we were just like instant soulmates. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so God attracted all these clones. They were in this big cloud of expanding gas coming from the Big Bang. Attracted them into a clump and made the first star. And that star burned hydrogen until God was saying, you know, somebody give me an idea for what happens next, because I think I'm all out of burning this stuff. What are we creating? And this is how the male demiurge decided, you know what, I'm going to give it a name. If I give it a name, can I be the leader of that team? Okay, you can do that, God says. But you have to give up your old position. You have to come be the leader of the helium team. That's the way it works. Okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be the leader of the helium team, and I'm going to take over when you're all done burning up all the hydrogen in the universe. Well, we kind of know how this goes from here. Once all the hydrogen was burned up, you start burning helium, and then, you know, somebody gives an idea, you know what, this is kind of boring. I think when you get through burning all this stuff, you know, we got to define what happens. It doesn't just start a new burn cycle. We got to have some kind of a celebration here. Hey, I've got an idea. Supernova. Let's have a big celebration explosion. Good idea. And that's how the first new supernova was invented. When stars stop burning the fuel that they're burning, they don't immediately start burning the next fuel. They have to condense enough to kick off that next reaction. And sometimes they condense to the point where they haven't started the new reaction, but they have an explosion. And this is where supernovas come from. Those are very useful things because they spread what you built in a star off into new clouds to build new stars from. Okay, so from this first primordial star, which probably was somewhere near the center of the Big Bang, the two universes of the Big Bang, and there was probably a star and an anti-star, because that's how the way the game worked then. It was very balanced. Every action had an equal and opposite reaction. That was one of the oldest laws in the multiverse. That's why we had the universe and the anti-universe. That was how the teams were kept even early on in creation, and that was very important to everybody, that nobody would think that they were winning, because they wanted to play this game a long time and really discover who was the winner. And with only a few souls playing, nobody would have been convinced whose side was right, God or the anti-God board, until pretty much all the souls in heaven had started playing the game. And there were a lot of ones that wanted to lay back, didn't want to just jump right into this. Let's see what everybody else gets up to. They didn't even want to jump into it when God jumped in, although some did. They hung back, said, well, we'll just sit up here and observe for a while. Okay, now, this is kind of the next step of what Noel means. and how it applies not only to God, but other souls. Okay, so the idea of no L is that you can't be two places at once. Okay? Even a God can't be two places at once. Now, when God came down from the first heaven to start participating in the multiverse, in the first two universes of the multiverse, well, God was no longer in heaven. What was there? An AI that replaced him, a virtual soul programmed to act like his current self in situations that were familiar. This virtual soul once in a while had to make a decision that wasn't in the list of instructions that God had left. And this is how souls start getting experience. These virtual souls don't just go away. They are new souls, and they eventually come out of this state of being a zero-level consciousness, being a program, to making decisions on their own. And that can take a long time, many decisions, much observation and choice before these new virtual souls become more than just like a Pinocchio puppet. Okay? And how long that takes, what has to happen, is basically how the law of karma has evolved from the very beginning. From the point of an honor system, which is what it was before creation ever happened. Do unto others, think unto others, as you would have them think unto you. Would be a good way to put it, before you could really do very much except think and communicate with thoughts. Okay, so God made the first star, burning hydrogen, and started this process of creating other elements. Some gods like the game of making new elements and kind of focused on the inner life of stars. What are the laws of new elements? What are the laws of what's the critical mass to start burning a new fuel, to start creating a new element? And what can you do with these elements in terms of basic chemistry? Other gods like the idea of, ooh, I'm going to be a star. And they decided they were going to focus on, like building the biggest star, making the biggest supernova, building galaxy clusters, building galaxies. I'm going to make the most beautiful, symmetrical galaxy ever. And that was another way you could play the game back then. And a lot of the old gods liked to play that game, especially when they found out that they could use their spiritual energy to throw things at each other. In fact, they started learning tricks like, well, it takes a lot of effort to throw things just willy-nilly, but if I set up rotations, I can keep throwing things at you periodically for a long time. Set something in motion that's going to keep coming back to pummel my enemies over and over while I go and find something else fun to do, because destroying your enemies isn't that much fun once you've done it once. If you know anything about winning, it doesn't give you much of a lift before you think you've got to win again, or you got to find a new target. Those who are into conflict for conflict's sake. And so, kind of there were two camps of gods and goddesses that emerged, both in the universe and the anti-universe. during this period. There were ones that were focused on building and ones that were focused on fighting, taking apart, construction and destruction. And as I've told you, they both served to stir the pot. Okay? Because anybody who knows anything about building anything, no matter how perfect the design is, eventually you're going to run out of room. You're going to realize the building doesn't really serve your needs anymore, and you're going to want to tear it down and build something else. And we're seeing that in spades right now with people thinking that they need a new government building for their country. And some people want to keep parts of the current building, maybe renovate things. Others want to rip it down to the ground, start over. Others just want to put maybe some new ornaments around the outside so it'll look good to the neighbors, and keep living in the same pigsty that they always have, that they've gotten comfortable with. There's all kinds of desires amongst souls. And a lot of the angst that has come from human religions has been about some souls advocating one way or another and saying that's the way everybody ought to think. We should all be one. The peace, love, and oneness crowd, the one God crowd. The none God crowd. Oh, it's gods that are the problem. We gotta believe in none. Or the ones that say, oh, well, it's all the men's fault. We just need women gods. Or it's all women's fault and we just need men gods. Or it's both of their fault and we need to create new sexes, so the old ones can be thrown out. We don't need that shit. All sorts of weird ass ideas you can come up with when you pull out your spiritual stops. At any rate, this phase of creation was kind of wild. A lot of the old gods found that they weren't good at playing new games. And a lot of them decided, you know what, I want to work on my own projects, but people keep throwing stars at me, galaxies at me, and destroying my creations. I'm so fed up with it. I'm going to move further. And this created the energy that got the multiverse, the universe is expanding faster, accelerating, so that the Big Bang became a big acceleration. It was spiritual energy that made that happen. The spiritual energy of, I guess you'd call it the anarchist, the ones that, I don't want to have to be subject to anybody else's laws. I want to go off to some corner where I can do it my way. And I'm going to move my shit as far away as possible. And of course, there were others that wanted to move their stuff into certain neighborhoods that they thought were, those are my kind of people. I'm going to move my galaxy to this cluster. Thinks like me and acts like me and has the same goals and desires. And that's kind of how we ended up with the Milky Way, which is a galaxy that we're very familiar with. It's the galaxy we exist in, our little planet Earth. And that's where this all is leading, in fact, to the fact that the next place that God chose to put his focus on after this galaxy game was done first was the Milky Way. This is the galaxy for people that think like me. I'm not forcing anybody to join my team as the first creator, but if you want to be hanging out with folks like me, let's go off to this galaxy and leave everybody else alone. And we can just look at them from afar, admire their work, but not be bothered by them all the time, or at least not for a long time. As you may know, the Andromeda Galaxy is going to be impacting the Milky Way, so apparently one of the other teams has found a way to navigate their experiment to impact our experiment at some point, but it's a long ways off. That level of game playing worked at a very, very slow time scale. Well, maybe didn't always, but now it's bounded by another law which came into being and was voted on and agreed on, the speed of light. That applies to most things, especially to things like galaxies and planets and etc., etc. The spiritual power to move planets around eventually was codified into gravity and became much less easy to use, which is how galaxies were able to isolate. You couldn't just suddenly say, oh, I'm going to send this star plummeting in the middle of your galaxy and wipe out all your best stars. Wasn't easy to do. You had to make a lot of plans to do that in the presence of gravity. Took a long time, a lot of thought, and a lot of very creative experimentation, which is exactly what the Creator, God, wanted. Let's have some room to make this work. Let's have some room to explore our ideas within the two universes we have so far. Okay? So, this happened first by God deciding which was going to be the star that was going to sort of be the center of the Milky Way. It's now at least presumed to be a big black hole at the center of our galaxy, and the huge mass that creates the rotation that produces sort of the pinwheel effect that we would see the Milky Way as if we were to look at it on side. And there are a lot of spiral galaxies like that. That's a very popular design. There are also galaxies that are completely wacko, don't look like any kind of pattern. And scientists, I don't think, have much explanation for that, whereas I absolutely do. They date from a time when the laws were not set. And you could pretty much make a galaxy like you would draw a picture on a Etch-a-Sketch or a tablet with a stylus. And maybe there's a theory of how the galaxy got that way, or there isn't. Something that makes scientific sense, or there isn't. Knock yourself out finding it. Till you do, I think my theory is a lot more useful than anything I've heard you guys come up with, except for what you come up with for some of the very common types of galaxies, like spiral arm galaxies. Okay, I'm not going to go into more detail there because I am not an expert in that subject. I know a fair amount about astronomy, cosmology, stellar dynamics, etc., but I don't know everything. Nobody can know everything, and that's why science has become very specialized. And it should be another proof that you can't keep all the knowledge in one consciousness. If it doesn't work down here, it's certainly not going to work in heaven. I'm sorry, folks. Your magic, almighty God is figment of your imagination. No more than a children's fairy tale. It's one that you have been told again and again and again till you believed it, which is kind of the way propaganda works. This is the way that cult Marxism works. Cult Marxism is creating a religion out of nonsense in order to gain control of people. And we are all seeing that going on around us. That's been going on ever since some tribal leader came back to his tribe and said, if we just go over there, we can catch the biggest deer ever. I took it down with my own knife, led by our great god, Blazabalaba. They go over, they see this dead deer. Yay, we have food. Well, the guy didn't really kill it. He just found it dead already. Somebody else had killed it and happened to wander off. He took credit for it. That's kind of how we ended up with almighty gods that have different names, different attributes, different worshipers that are all at each other's throats. So, I know it's kind of dampening the Christmas spirit to say so, but in fact, Jesus is not God. Allah is not God. None of the gods mentioned in the Bible were God. There were some individuals in there that probably were God hiding in incarnation, an incarnation of God. But as I've told you, messiahs don't work in the way you think they would. They don't go for physical fame and fortune. They don't try to gather everybody together by doing magic tricks and impressing them and getting them to, ooh, you're God, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't work like that. Anybody who does that is misusing an opportunity at a Messiah life. We'll talk about that elsewhere. I don't want to rain too much on the holiday spirit. But let me tell you, in finishing, I'm going to try to tell you about an unsung Messiah in every story I give you till Christmas. And if you're listening to the music I've got in the background, let me turn it up just a tad, because you can't quite hear it, can you? Some of you might have recognized the first piece of this music. It's all part of one piece, little movements of a piece called Carmina Burana by the German composer Karl Orff. Now, this is an interesting cat. Orff was a composer born about the same time as Adolf Hitler in Germany. Had a very similar life path. Fairly affluent family, not so affluent that they could avoid going to war. Orff's family was actually a military family, which was also oddly a very musical family. As I suspect, Hitler's family was somewhat artistic, or had some appreciation for art, and that's how he gained his interest in art. As you may not know, Hitler was a budding artist, and his disappointment in a career as a painter led him to get involved in politics. Well, Orff kind of had the opposite path. He had some success in music and was actually fairly successful at it, had a number of positions in opera houses and stuff like that, got exposure and stuff, to people, and became a minor composer. In fact, Carmina Burana is his only piece that really has any large recognition. And it's huge. I mean, it's like a one-hit wonder piece. Everybody has heard that, O Fortuna. Let's play it again in case you didn't recognize it the first time. right from the first couple of bars, everybody knows this piece. They may not know it was Karl Orff, they may not know it's Carmina Burana, but it's very familiar, correct? Okay, let's go back where we were. So, yeah. Well, it turns out that this piece, famous piece of his, happened to have been written in 1937. Now, Orff himself came from a family that had mixed Jewish-Catholic heritage. Somehow avoided getting called out for his Jewish ancestry and stayed in Germany throughout the war and kept doing his thing. Because the most famous piece of music that came out of Nazi Germany was Carmina Burana, he actually got tried as a war criminal. They investigated him, put him through psychological testing and other fun and games before finally deciding that he was not a Nazi and he hadn't done anything that a normal composer wouldn't do if they happened to get stuck in a country like Nazi Germany. He hadn't done anything to promote Nazism. He just had chosen not to play that game. He didn't oppose it. He didn't support it. He just kept on doing what he did, which was teaching music in a university and composing music. At any rate, I think that Orff kind of qualifies as a messiah of music. Not a big success, but made a big difference to the world. If you study more about what his ideas of music were, he wanted to get to a more elemental envisioning of music, more basic. This Carmina Burana piece is based upon old medieval songs that were sung in universities and the seedier parts of town, kind of some of them almost as a spoof of Christianity or as the counterculture to Christianity, and often harken back to pre-Christian themes or to ideas in Christianity which had been made into heresy. And there were groups of nuns and monks who traveled about sort of defying the Catholic Church. Well, they didn't settle down very much. They kind of traveled like gypsies in the medieval world and did their thing, which was kind of like very counterculture-ish. And they sort of got a reputation kind of like Jews. You don't want them around because they're subversive. In fact, they were less desired than Jews. Maybe right in the same category as gypsies. Maybe that is where the gypsy population really came from. A gathering of people that led a migrant life rather than submit to the will of the local nobility, the local church, rebelling against the old world order. So interesting that those ideas were brought back into our thinking by somebody like Karl Orff through this one piece. One-hit wonder. This is how a Messiah life can be. I'm not saying that... Can I finish up, baby?
He's cranky.
I know he's cranky.
He's one papa.
Well, he can come and sit with me for the rest of the talk, all right? We're almost done.
Don't yell to him.
I'm not going to yell to him.
Hi, guys.
There's my wife. She ran out of patience with the boy, so we're going to have him for the rest of the talk. We're almost done now anyway. Okay, so Karl Orff is an interesting fellow to study. hardly as well known as a Mozart or a Beethoven, but absolutely one of the messiahs of music that had a fairly religious / political tint to it, as music often does. And certainly writing or painting even more often does. And film most often does. So, when you're thinking about what to watch, what to listen to, what to read this holiday season, I challenge you to find the spiritual and the political messages that are hidden within them. And so, for the Omnist Hour, I think we're ready to sign out. Like, share, subscribe, watch some of my other episodes, and look for another episode of the Omnist Hour with Rob Trump soon. Happy Karma. Wave goodbye, Mikhail. Bye-bye.